Welcome to Families and Faith Online, a tool for parents who want to teach their kids about Jesus. This week we finish up our training on the Shema passage from Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. This passage is to call for parents to teach their children about God. It starts with us. We are to love God with all of our heart, soul, and strength. Then we are to teach our children about God. And this starts at home. The home is the most influential place on earth for teaching young people about Jesus. Next, we see God's plan for how we are to do this. It follows the rhythm of life. We teach our children as we go about our days together. Well, today we conclude with the closing concept from this passage, the idea of reminding ourselves. This role of teaching our children about God is the most important thing parents will ever do. It's so important that God tells us to remind ourselves of this daily task. We tie them as symbols on our hands and bind them on our foreheads. We write them on the door frames of your houses and on our gates. I became a father about 4 years ago. It was during this time that I was studying for my doctorate, and as a part of my studies, I dove into this passage known as the Shema. It became very evident to me as a youth minister that I needed to refocus my ministry away from what I could teach and towards what parents should be teaching. I also now had my own kids, and I wanted them to know Jesus. Well, God's roadmap has become a very key part for me and a key thing for me. Well, with this closing concept of reminders, I set out to remind myself, to make sure that I didn't lose focus, but constantly remember that my most important job was to teach my children about Jesus. I started with the idea of tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them to your foreheads. Have you ever seen an old Bible movie where the Pharisees would wear a box on their forehead? Well, this box contained the law of God. It was a physical reminder set on their foreheads of their role. Well, I wasn't too keen on the idea of having a box on my forehead, so I went with the idea of tying them on my hands. I chose to tattoo the Hebrew word Shema on my wrist. Well, this is a bit extreme, I know, and I'm certainly not advocating parents to get tattoos. Rather, for me, it was a permanent daily reminder of my role as father and of spiritual leader of my household. Next, I turned to the idea of writing them on the door frames of my house and on my gate. I learned about a Jewish tradition called the mezuzah. This is how Jewish households write the Shema passage on the door frames of their houses and on their gates. I went on Amazon.com and bought a mezuzah and put it on the doorframe of my house. Every time I leave the house or come home, I see this reminder. It tells me to make the most of my time with my family, to remember to bring God into our home and our lives and our conversations. Well, there are other things around my house that are also reminders to me. Christian art, crosses, and Bibles. Things that keep me focused on my most important task. Today, I want you to not only realize that God wants you to teach your children about Him, but He wants you to remind yourself. What do you use to remind yourself that you should be teaching your children about Jesus? Spend some time this week developing a plan for how you can set those reminders up. Do you buy a mezuzah? Do you use your smartphone or post-it notes? How does your calendar reflect this most important task? Think about the ways you remind yourself to complete important tasks or get to important meetings. How can you use those same mechanisms to remind yourself to teach your children about Jesus? Don't forget. May God bless you as you teach your children about Him, and you find ways to always remember and remind yourself your God-given role as the lead teacher of the faith.